I always thought our remote cabin was the safest place in the world, tucked deep in the Colorado pines. Miles away from the madness of city life until the morning 3 men dressed as cops kicked in our front door shouting, "Open up, we have an HOA order," and turned our peaceful retreat into a war zone. If you've ever thought HOA drama was petty or just about fences and lawns, let me tell you, what happened to us was an ambush and organized. Deliberate criminal ambush. They came at 8 a.m. sharp, flashlights blazing into the windows, boots hammering against the wooden floors like we were a meth lab under raid, except their uniforms were made of cheap polyester and their badges were plastic, swinging awkwardly. With every aggressive move, it looked like they got their gear from a Halloween clearance rack. But they didn't come to play. They came to take my son. What they didn't know, what the HOA president Susan Hayes didn't know, was that my son wasn't just a former field agent. He now trains FBI operatives in martial arts, hostage defense, and counter-surveillance. They didn't expect him to walk out onto that living room floor, calm and barefoot in his joggers, appraising them the way a lion looks at cornered prey. Within seconds, one fake cop was unconscious on the porch. Another was snoring on my hardwood floor next to the coffee table. And the third had wet himself while sobbing, hands in the air, begging not to be hurt. And me, I just stood there frozen, with my half-poured mug of coffee, watching it all unfold like I was trapped inside a movie. If you're reading this, I need you to understand something right now. This wasn't a random act of aggression. This was a planned attempt to kidnap my son using fake cops under the direction of our HOA president. And it triggered a federal investigation that would go on to expose one of the most corrupt homeowner associations in American history. So stick around, because the twists that followed surveillance drones, forged violations, hidden shell companies, and one very sweet old neighbor who turned out to be a retired federal judge will blow your mind. Now, let me take you back to where it really began. My name is Ellis Rohr, a 58-year-old retired software engineer. And every year, my son Marcus and I spend a week off the grid at our cabin in Pine Ridge Estates. It's a quiet, heavily wooded area, mostly vacation homes, minimal neighbors, and we liked it that way. We weren't even full-time residents. We came to escape, recharge, and enjoy father-son bonding without interruptions. But this time, we weren't alone. That morning, while I was making coffee and Marcus was doing pull-ups on the back deck, the front door was obliterated by 3 men dressed in fake law enforcement uniforms. "You're in violation of Pine Ridge Estates community standards?" The biggest one barked as he read from a crumpled piece of paper, "You need to vacate this property immediately." I could see the tension in Marcus's jaw as he stepped into the room. He was wearing his black FBI training shirt, the logo stretched across his chest, sweat still glistening on his arms. But they didn't register it. These idiots were so caught up in their performance they didn't even process the very obvious clue that they had just walked into a federal agent's vacation home. What happened next was fast and brutal. The big guy lunged. Marcus sidestepped, grabbed him mid-motion, twisted, and slammed him face first into the doorframe before tossing him outside like a sack of trash. The second guy came from the kitchen, probably thinking he'd catch Marcus off guard. He didn't even get close. A single elbow, a knee to the ribs, and he collapsed without a sound. The third guy, young, shaky, and clearly in over his head, dropped to his knees the moment Marcus turned toward him. "Please don't kill me," he said. "She gave us $400. I thought it was just for show." I asked who she was, but I already knew. Susan Hayes, the newly elected HOA president, who had been handing out rule violations like candy since taking over 3 months ago. She had started small mailbox colors, trash bin placement, but she had escalated quickly. Marcus had even joked the week before, saying, "Dad, this lady's trying to run Pine Ridge like a compound." Turns out he was more right than either of us realized. And while the babbling fake cop sobbed about needing rent money, Marcus picked up his tablet and tapped into the drone footage he'd been recording since sunrise. What the attackers didn't know was that Marcus had rigged our cabin with a sophisticated security system that recorded everything and sent real-time footage to secure off-site cloud storage. It wasn't just a hobby. It was his fallback if anything ever went wrong. The second the front door was breached, The system had alerted federal databases that a potential attack was occurring at the residence of an FBI defense instructor. 30 minutes after the takedown, my phone rang with a call from the Colorado Federal Security Office. "Mr. Rohr, we received an alert concerning your residence. Are you safe?" I said yes, barely. As we waited for the real authorities to arrive, Marcus frisked the unconscious intruders. In one wallet, we found $1,200 in cash and a chilling note. "Bonus, if you make them scared." S. That S might as well have stood for Susan. The man was carrying a disposable phone. No ID. The other two weren't much different. No. Real documentation. All burner tools. These guys weren't just local troublemakers. They had been hired for this, paid to play a role, and it wasn't their first gig. That thought alone sent a fresh wave of dread through me. 20 minutes later, the real police and a black SUV of federal agents pulled up. The sharp-eyed woman, who stepped out, introduced herself as Agent Chen. "Mr. Rohr," she said, handing me a card. "We need to talk." Meanwhile, Marcus was already receiving coded messages on his secondary work phone. I recognized the change in his posture, the shift from vacation mode to mission mode. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was operating. I asked what was going on, and he said, "Work stuff. I'll explain later." But I could tell that later was going to change everything. Agent Chen didn't mince words. "There may be more to this incident than we initially assumed," she said. "Has anything else unusual happened recently?" That's when I remembered the violation letter. It's just the day before. We had received a 47-page document from the HOA outlining 312 violations committed by our property. I'd lived in Pine Ridge Estates for 15 years and hadn't heard of half those rules. No more than 2 vehicles, no dogs over 20 pounds, no visible outdoor furniture after 7 p.m. We didn't even own a dog. My truck was 6 years old. This wasn't regulation, it was warfare. I spread the document across the dining table and felt a cold shiver run through me. Every single violation had been tailor-written for our cabin. The dates lined up with events only Marcus and I knew about. And the kicker? Every rule was signed into effect in the last 90 days by Susan Hayes. I dug into the HOA's online archive and found that Susan had changed the HOA policies 73 times in just 6 months. And every change created a new opportunity for citations. But it didn't stop there. A deeper search through the county records revealed that a shell company named Mountain Vista Holdings, LLC, had been quietly purchasing properties around Pine Ridge at suspiciously low prices. Every family that sold had first received massive HOA citations. The pattern was clear. Flood them with violations, scare them, force a sale, then flip the property. And now, it seemed, she had gotten bolder, going from intimidation to outright force. I was about to tell Marcus what I'd found when I checked the mailbox and found a plain manila envelope with no return address. On the front, in perfect cursive, it read, "Read when no one is watching. We need to talk." Inside were 12 photographs, families packing up moving trucks. Their faces etched with fear, each photo dated over the past 18 months. Taped to the back of each picture was an address. 23 in total. All homes now owned by Mountain Vista Holdings. There was a note inside, signed D.K. Dorothy Kessler. Our 67-year-old neighbor who made banana bread and organized game nights. Her note read, "Call after dark. Watch during the day." And with that, everything changed. If you want to find out what Dorothy knew, what the FBI uncovered, and how my son's training helped bring down the most dangerous HOA scam in America, stay right here. The moment the sun dipped behind the Pine Ridge and the shadows stretched long across the cabin floor, I picked up my phone and called the number Dorothy had scribbled at the bottom of the note tucked in the mysterious envelope. It rang twice, before a voice answered, low and cautious, "Ellis." I confirmed it was me, and she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "I've been waiting for this moment. You need to know everything, and you need to hear it from me. Before it's too late." The soft-spoken old woman from down the road, who always wore floral sweaters and baked cinnamon muffins, began recounting a horror story that had unfolded quietly over the past 2 years. Silent war no one realized was being waged until families were already gone. One by one, residents of Pine Ridge Estates had been bombarded with false citations from the HOA. Served letters full of legal jargon that looked official, but were rooted in newly invented rules. These violations came in waves: first warnings, then fines, then threats of legal action and court involvement. Families buckled under the weight of fees, stress, and fear. Most sold, some vanished overnight. Dorothy had been watching closely, documenting everything, pretending to play the naive retiree while photographing license plates, collecting paper trails, and building her own case in silence. What she uncovered was worse than anything I imagined. Susan Hayes, the self-appointed president of the HOA, had been using her authority to systematically drive out homeowners, forcing them to sell under duress, and purchasing their properties through a shadowy company, Mountain Vista Holdings LLC, the very company I'd seen listed on our county records. Dorothy had confirmed what I suspected. The HOA, under Susan's control, was not a homeowner advocacy group. It was a real estate acquisition front, designed to use legal pressure and targeted harassment to get valuable mountain property for pennies on the dollar. They target families who don't fight back, Dorothy said, her voice trembling but resolute. You and your son are the first ones to stand your ground. That's why they escalated. Escalated. That was the word that haunted me. They hadn't just sent letters, it sent fake cops to our cabin. It attempted to abduct Marcus, my son. And if they had succeeded, I might have been left with a wrecked cabin and no answers. I shared everything with Marcus, who was now pacing the cabin, deep in thought, analyzing every move like a tactical exercise. It's worse than a fraud. Ring, he muttered. This is a coordinated effort to launder property value and flip entire communities. They're running it like a cartel. While he strategized, I dove back into the files Dorothy had left. The photos, the addresses, the names. All of them were victims' ordinary families who had once waved from porches and invited us over for barbecues. Now their homes were listed under shell corporations, their digital footprints scrubbed clean. One picture stopped me cold. A family of 4 parents, 2 kids standing outside their cabin, the same cabin Susan Hayes now used as her HOA office. The timestamp on the back read 8 months ago. She had driven them out, moved in, and claimed it as her headquarters. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. This wasn't about enforcing rules. This was about control, power, and profit. That night, Marcus set up motion-detecting perimeter drones and remote security sweeps, turning our remote retreat into a digital fortress. We were no longer on vacation. We were preparing for a siege. The next morning, I received a call from Benjamin Cross, a local attorney I had contacted when the HOA violations first started coming in. He sounded unusually cheerful. Ellis. Great news. Susan Hayes has agreed to drop all violations against your property. She's even prepared an official apology letter. I didn't respond right away. The sudden change of tone, the quick resolution, it felt staged. My instincts flared. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately told Marcus. They're trying to lull us into stepping back, he said. Classic misdirection. Appear to concede, then attack again. He was right. That afternoon, his drone picked up something disturbing to men placing surveillance equipment in the trees behind our cabin. When Marcus intercepted them, they claimed to be utility inspectors. Neither had uniforms, identification, or answers. They left, but not before Marcus snapped photos of their truck and license plates. We ran the plates. Belonged to a rental van tied to a shell company connected to Mountain Vista Holdings. That same night, Marcus deployed listening devices near the HOA office, the very cabin Susan had taken over. What he recorded chilled us both, Susan Hayes, in a phone call she thought was private. Casually discussed liquidating the remaining resistance properties by the end of the quarter. We need Pine Ridge cleared by the next fiscal review, she said. If Cross plays his part, the rest will fall in line. She mentioned Benjamin by name, the attorney he'd been bought. $15,000 to pretend to represent us, only to pressure us into accepting a fake settlement. Marcus forwarded the audio to Agent Chen, who called within minutes. Ellis, we've been monitoring Susan Hayes for 8 months, she said. but what you just captured gives us the missing link. We're moving into phase 2. You're not alone anymore. By morning, unmarked federal vehicles were stationed discreetly along the edge of the property. Agents disguised as hikers, joggers, delivery drivers. Investigation was now live, and we were the center of it. Dorothy came by that evening, her floral cardigan replaced by a gray field jacket and a briefcase full of documents. "Time you knew who I really am," she said. "I'm a retired federal judge, and I've been working with the Bureau to bring Susan Hayes down. We call it Operation Clean Sweep." My jaw dropped. All this time, the friendly neighbor was the mastermind behind a federal sting operation. She opened her files and laid them across our kitchen table. Documents, photos, affidavits, legal motions. She had been building the case from the inside. "Susan thinks she's cleaning up the neighborhood," Dorothy said. "But really, she's built the largest real estate fraud operation this side of the Mississippi." It was all connected: Mountain Vista Holdings, the HOA rules, the fake violations, the surveillance, the forced sales. And now the federal government was ready to shut it down. "You and Marcus are key," Dorothy said. "They made you the example, and we'll use that to take them apart." We were no longer defending ourselves. We were going on offense. I could see it in Marcus's eyes, the spark of determination, the readiness. And for the first time since that door burst open, I felt something close to hope. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. Susan Hayes wouldn't go down quietly. She had built an empire on intimidation and manipulation. She'd do anything to protect it. Anything. And if we weren't ready, she'd come against stronger, bolder, more desperate. I looked out into the forest as night fell. The next morning began with a stillness that felt unnatural, like the entire forest around us was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And after everything Marcus and I had uncovered over the past 48 hours, I knew that silence wasn't pice. It was pressure building beneath the surface. It's waiting to explode. And sure enough, just before breakfast, while Marcus was reviewing overnight drone footage and I was brewing coffee, a white SUV pulled into the dirt road just past our gate, stopped for exactly 7 seconds, and then backed out slowly, deliberately, as if whoever was inside wanted to be seen but not identified. And Marcus, without missing a beat, snapped a photo of the license plate and uploaded it to the FBI field channel connected to Agent Chen's surveillance portal. And less than 10 minutes later, we received confirmation that the vehicle was registered under an alias used by a subcontractor tied to Mountain Vista Holdings, the same shadow company connected to the other forced property sales in Pine Ridge Estates. And that's when I realized just how deeply this operation ran not just intimidation and harassment, but full surveillance, planted operatives, and data monitoring. And if they were circling our cabin in daylight now, it meant Susan Hayes was getting desperate, or arrogant, or both. I stepped outside with my coffee, trying to act normal, but my eyes scanned the tree lines, and sure enough, small glints of metal and glass blinked in the underbrush, tiny motion cameras. Some high-end trail cams, others clearly advanced wireless, units disguised as wildlife monitoring tools, but all of them pointed at our property, and Marcus, watching me from the deck, quietly muttered, "They're building a digital fence around us." And the way he said it, cold, analytical, not panicked, made my stomach turn more than if he had shouted. We needed to act before they tightened the noose. That afternoon, Dorothy returned, this time with a full case file compiled by a whistleblower, former HOA board member named Cliff Rogers, who had served under Susan Hayes for just 3 weeks before resigning and going silent. And Dorothy had tracked him down through a burner email address buried in a pile of old communications she'd pulled from a compromised HOA server. Cliff's testimony laid everything bare. Susan Hayes had orchestrated the complete takeover of Pine Ridge Estates by systematically targeting residents she labeled as incompatible with the new community vision, which was her euphemism for people who wouldn't bow to her authority or sell their homes quietly. And Cliff had witnessed secret board meetings where Susan assigned property targets by name, instructing her small group of loyalists to fabricate violations, tamper with records, and in some cases, install audio devices under the guise of utility maintenance checks. One line in Cliff's signed statement sent a shiver down my spine. She told us if anyone resisted too strongly, we had options external help-off book solutions. That confirmed what had happened at our cabin wasn't just harassment, it was a sanctioned act within her system, something she believed she had the power to order. And now that Marcus had disabled and exposed her fake enforcers, we were her top problem. Agent Chen arrived in person that evening, traveling in an unmarked black sedan with government plates half covered in pine dust. She entered the cabin without knocking, her eyes sharp, posture tight, and said only, "The takedown. Window is closing. We move soon." Marcus briefed her on everything: drone footage, camera placements, license plate tracking, audio surveillance, and then handed her the voice recording of Susan Hayes discussing liquidation timelines and fiscal deadlines. For the first time, I saw something change in Agent Chen's demeanor. Her jaw clenched slightly. "We needed that," she said. "That recording turns this from a civil complaint into a federal criminal conspiracy. And that means we're bringing in heavier boots." She tapped her earpiece, made a coded call, and within the hour, 2 more federal agents arrived, posing as wilderness photographers, setting up base camp in the clearing just south of our property. From our living room window, I watched them pretend to adjust camera tripods while actually installing encrypted surveillance jammers and wide-range signal interceptors. Susan Hayes' network had just lost its eyes and ears, at least temporarily, but Marcus wasn't satisfied. "We need to draw her out," he said. "We can't let her vanish when the net closes. She'll run." So he proposed something bold, sending a fake concession letter through Benjamin Cross, the corrupted attorney, suggesting we were willing to settle the matter privately in exchange for the HOA dropping all citations and paying damages. She never agreed to it, I said. "Exactly," Marcus replied, "but she'd come out of hiding to stop it." We drafted the letter carefully, made sure it sounded just naive enough to be believable, but firm enough to provoke her. Benjamin responded within the hour, shocked but excited, clearly thinking he was about to collect another bonus from Susan. "This is a good move," he wrote. "I'll present it to her personally tonight." Marcus looked at me and said, "Now we wait." But waiting was the hardest part, especially when you know someone might try to break into your home again. That night, as we sat in low light, security feeds streaming on every monitor, Marcus suddenly sat up straight. "Got her," he said, pointing at one of the drone feeds. A black Range Rover had pulled up behind the HOA office cabin, no plates. Headlights off, and out stepped Susan Hayes, flanked by 2 men in dark jackets. One of them carried a tablet, the other had something metallic strapped to his belt. Marcus zoomed in, enhanced the image, and we both saw it: a wire cutter. They were coming to destroy evidence. Marcus tapped into the audio feed planted earlier and activated it. Susan's voice crackled through the speakers, impatient and low. "Delete everything." Rogers talked. "I want the backups gone. We can fix the paperwork later." No? The men began pulling hard drives and smashing equipment. But they didn't know they were being recorded again. Marcus transmitted the feed live to Agent Chen, who responded with a single-word text: "Go." 10 minutes later, a tactical unit swept in. No sirens, no warning, just a flash of lights, a thud of boots, and a screech as Susan Hayes was pinned face down on the ground, screaming about her rights, while the 2 men she brought tried to run, but were quickly tackled by agents emerging from the woods. From our deck, I watched it all, stunned, breathless. The dragon had been slain, but the war wasn't over. Back inside, Marcus was already reviewing new data. "Dad," he said slowly, "you're not going to believe this." He turned the screen toward me. It was a financial ledger one Dorothy had decrypted from the HOA's server backups, showing that Mountain Vista Holdings wasn't just buying up homes. They were flipping them through a chain of companies that eventually linked back to a real estate investment trust based in New York. Susan wasn't the top. She was a middle manager in a much bigger machine. "This isn't over," I said quietly. "We're just scratching the surface." Agent Chen confirmed our fears. The next day, we arrested Hayes and seized her local assets, but the money trail keeps going, she said. "We need your help following it upstream." Marcus nodded. "We're in." Just like that, our vacation had transformed from a family retreat into the front line of a nationwide investigation. Susan Hayes was just one piece of the puzzle. By the time the sun rose the following morning, news of Susan Hayes' arrest had already begun spreading through Pine Ridge Estates. Though the official story given to the community was far more sanitized than the truth, HOA president taken into custody over financial irregularities. The local paper wrote, as if she had been caught fudging numbers instead of orchestrating staged raids and targeted property seizures under the guise of community governance. And while the neighborhood gossiped, speculated, and in some cases, celebrated, Marcus and I remained locked in the cabin, working alongside Agent Chen and Dorothy to trace the newly uncovered financial trail that stretched far beyond Susan's office, far beyond Pine Ridge, even beyond Colorado, and what began as a list of suspicious property transfers ballooned into a web of interconnected LLCs, fake management firms, and shell corporations stretching coast to coast with names that changed by the week and addresses that led to mail drop offices or abandoned storefronts. Dorothy, now fully out of retirement, had taken over our dining table with her files and laptop, wearing glasses that made her look more like a legal assassin than a retired grandmother. And as she cross-referenced ownership records, tax documents, and financial disclosures, she found what she called the Root Noda Holding Company in Delaware, registered to a firm called Bright Ridge Asset Solutions. And when Agent Chen ran the name through her federal systems, the screen lit up with yellow tags, red alerts, and one line that made my blood freeze, previously linked to coercive property reclamation schemes in 6 states. Suspected federal racketeering activity. Susan Hayes, for all her arrogance and cruelty, had only been a foot soldier in a much larger operation. That night, while the neighborhood celebrated her arrest with what they called a freedom from Fine's barbecue, Marcus intercepted a message from one of the encrypted radio frequencies still operating in the area. Short, broken transmissions, barely intelligible. But one phrase repeated twice: package failed. Reroute order confirmed. Prepare cabin for reset. We stared at the screen, unsure if we were the package or the target. But the implication was clear. Someone higher up in the chain had just authorized another move, and it was coming fast. Marcus immediately increased the drone patrol range and activated the secondary sensors he'd buried around the perimeter when we first arrived. And within an hour, 2 trip alarms triggered on the southern edge of our property movement in the woods. Figures moving low, deliberate, experienced. These weren't thugs in costume. These were professionals. I grabbed the emergency radio and alerted Agent Chen, who calmly said, "We're tracking it. They're testing your perimeter. Don't engage." But Marcus was already moving, strapping on his tactical belt, slipping into the trees with a small duffel bag containing nothing but non-lethal takedown gear and a thermal scope. For 30 tense minutes, I monitored the drone feeds while Dorothy updated legal timelines and Agent Chen coordinated surveillance sweeps. And then the door creaked open and Marcus stepped inside, dragging 2 unconscious men in camo gear zip-tied and blindfolded, with earpieces still buzzing low commands in their ears. "Not locals," he said. "One's got a scar from military training. The other has a sat phone." Agent Chen moved like lightning, securing the room, confiscating the devices, and calling in an emergency extraction team. Within the hour, 2 black choppers descended into a clearing a mile out, and the men were gone. Swept into federal custody, their arrival at Pine Ridge recorded and submitted as additional evidence. But their presence confirmed one thing: the people behind Mountain Vista Holdings weren't just financial predators. They had muscle, real muscle. And if they were willing to send trained operatives to silence a retired engineer and his FBI retrained son, then we were deeper in this than we had ever imagined. Dorothy warned us not to go anywhere alone, not to open the door without checking 3 camera feeds first, and not to assume Susan Hayes' removal meant we were safe, or silence. "We'll trigger panic," Dorothy said. "We'll either shut it all down or try to clean house." That night, Marcus found a bug in one of our firewood stacks on, actual listening device tucked beneath the kindling. Tiny, efficient, meant for long-range transmission. Doc. We replaced it with a dummy transmitter broadcasting random static and idle conversation about dog food and fishing trips, hoping to mislead whoever was listening. 2 days later, under the pretense of a spontaneous HOA meeting, a handful of remaining board members gathered at the community lodge, a building we now knew was also under surveillance by the Bureau. We listened in through a live feed, watching them argue, sweat, and eventually splinter, one man standing up and accusing the others of lying, another demanding legal protection, a woman quietly deleting files from her tablet while pretending to take notes. By the end of the meeting, 3 of them had walked out in silence, and later that evening, Agent Chen informed us that 2 had attempted to flee the state. Both were intercepted at the airport. But something about that night felt wrong. A cause was uneasy. The calm felt too convenient, too soon. So we waited. And then, just after midnight, the lights in the cabin flickered. Not a power surge, something more surgical, deliberate disruption. Marcus leapt into action, checking our generators, backup batteries, and signal repeaters. All fine. But the data transmission line had been severed. Someone had cut through. The fiber optic cable leading from our satellite uplink. We weren't offline. We were blind. Dorothy tapped her encrypted line and couldn't get through. Agent Chen's response was delayed by nearly 4 minutes, an eternity in surveillance time. And then the real blow landed. A message on Marcus's secure tablet: cabin compromise detected. Evacuate immediately. But it wasn't from the FBI server. It was from Marcus's personal server, a failsafe system he had built independently, programmed to detect signature patterns of hostile digital intrusion. They've breached the grid, Marcus said, his voice quiet. And there, inside the infrastructure, we had 30 minutes to evacuate. That's how long the server estimated before a full system override could be achieved. In that window, Marcus pulled all critical data from his encrypted backups, loaded Dorothy's legal files into a secure drive, and erased every device with a military-grade data wipe. Then we packed quick, efficient, no panic. Only as we loaded into Agent Chen's secondary transport vehicle did I glance back at the cabin. The place I'd built with my own hands. The symbol of peace I'd shared with my son, now under siege. By forces I hadn't known existed until a few days ago. They won't destroy it, Marcus said as he climbed in beside me. We've already copied everything. The story's out. But I knew the war was far from over. That night, we relocated to a federal safe house on the edge of another town. It's just far enough from Pine Ridge to be hidden, but close enough to monitor developments. And as the news broke of more arrests, more raids, and a deepening federal probe into Mountain Vista Holdings and its affiliates, we watched silently from behind secure glass, knowing that our part in this wasn't done yet. Susan Hayes had been the face. The smile on the Facebook post, the voice at community meetings. But the machine behind her was still running, still operating. And someone, somewhere in a tall building, wearing a suit and sipping coffee, had just received a report that 2 of their operatives had been captured by a retired software engineer and his son. The federal safe house was tucked behind a long gravel road in the foothills west of town, just past a decommissioned ranger station and under the thick canopy of old-growth pine trees. The kind of place built for silence, for hiding, for watching. The world without being seen. And in the days following our evacuation from the cabin, Marcus, Agent Chen, Dorothy, and I turned that quiet refuge into the nerve center of a full-blown federal operation aimed at dismantling the sprawling network. Behind Mountain Vista Holdings, from the outside, it looked like we were lying low, but inside, screens glowed day and night, data streams pulsed across encrypted lines. In every name, document, bank transaction, Marcus set up a portable data vault in one of the back bedrooms, filling it with satellite intercepts, server records, HOA metadata, and over 300 hours of surveillance footage, while Dorothy sat with Agent Chen daily, building the case files. That would soon be handed off to multiple task forces in D.C., New York, and San Francisco. The deeper we dug, the more terrifyingly efficient the conspiracy became. Bright Ridge Asset Solutions, the Delaware-based parent entity we'd identified earlier, wasn't just buying up vacation communities. they were flipping neighborhoods into private investment zones, displacing homeowners by exploiting obscure HOA clauses, then laundering the profits through fake maintenance contracts, inflated fines, and bulk property sales to shell trusts. They had agents planted in real estate firms, law offices, and even small municipal departments, each one playing their role to keep the gears turning. Susan had been the face of Pine Ridge, but her arrest had triggered alerts across the entire system. Within 72 hours, Bright Ridge had closed 6 field offices, liquidated assets in Montana and Nevada, and scrubbed websites linked to their management subsidiaries. But it was too late. The data was already in our hands. That week, Agent Chen began preparing us for testimony. "You're not just witnesses," she said. "You're targets turned collaborators. They will try to discredit you, frighten you, or buy you off. Stay grounded." I thought I understood the risk until I stepped outside one night and found a white envelope taped under the gas tank of our SUV. Inside was a photo of Marcus and me standing on our cabin porch, taken the day before the raid. The image was printed on glossy paper, and written across the bottom in Sharpie were the words, "Last warning." No return address, no fingerprints, nothing else. We handed it over to Chen, and her team ran a full forensic scan. The camera used was traced back to a security contractor with a vague employment history and no current address. Just another ghost in the network. "They're scared," Marcus said that night, "which means we're winning." Still, it didn't feel like winning when you had to check under your car every time you left a building. Meanwhile, the town around Pine Ridge began to unravel. With Susan gone, the remaining HOA board dissolved in panic. Some members turned themselves in, offering documents and testimony in exchange for protection. Others simply vanished, houses left abandoned, bank accounts emptied, identities wiped. And then, a week after the safe house lockdown, Dorothy discovered the most damning piece of evidence yet. Tucked in an old server backup from Susan Hayes' personal laptop, recovered after her arrest, was an audio recording dated 9 months ago, Susan on a conference call with executives from Bright Ridge, outlining the property conversion timeline, her progress with Pine Ridge, and a chilling segment where she laughed and said, "If they don't cooperate, we scare them. If that doesn't work, we send in the boys. We've got clearance, don't we?" The voice on the other end replied, "Full authorization. Just keep it quiet." That clip, once authenticated, moved the case from a fraud investigation to federal racketeering with enhanced criminal conspiracy charges. It also meant that Susan wasn't just a pawn. She had willingly participated. She had escalated. Had enjoyed it. Marcus and I listened to that recording 3 times. Each time my blood boiled hotter. I remembered the way she smiled in that filtered selfie after the fake cops attacked our cabin. "Justice served," she'd written. She had no idea she was documenting her own downfall. Agent Chen called in a Justice Department liaison to begin prepping the indictment package. "This case," he said, "is going to change how homeowner associations are regulated nationwide." Just when we thought we had turned the corner, it happened. Someone leaked the investigation, an anonymous online post on a fringe reel. A state forum described the operation in detail, names, dates, methods. Within hours, disinformation bots flooded social media, accusing us of being criminals, government plants, even terrorists. Fake documents were posted claiming Marcus had a dishonorable discharge from the FBI. Photoshop edits showed me in mugshots from crimes I never committed. The media circus started brewing. News vans appeared outside Pine Ridge. Reporters shouted, "Questions." Our names began circulating on conspiracy forums. "You're trying to control the narrative," Dorothy said. "Discredit the story before it breaks." Chen doubled security. We were officially moved to a black site facility under federal protection. No windows. Signal jammers. IDs revoked. We were ghosts now. And while the world debated if we were heroes or criminals, the case moved forward. One morning, while reviewing a chain of property sales connected to an Arizona suburb, Marcus froze. "I know that name," he said. The buyer listed for a group of 10 properties was a man who had once attended Marcus's FBI defensive training seminar 2 years ago in Quantico. He wasn't law enforcement, Marcus said. It was private sector, real estate tech, and he asked a lot of weird questions. We dug in. His name led to a firm in Austin. Another. Rat in the maze. That night, while the safe house team was asleep, Marcus and I sat outside under the stars, one of the few safe places where we could breathe. I never thought teaching self-defense would come to this, he said. To our cabin, Dad. Our home. All because we didn't roll over. I put a hand on his shoulder. We stood our ground. That's what matters. But even as I said it, I wondered what the cost would ultimately be. Our lives had been appended, our names dragged through digital filth, our cabin violated, our peace shattered. And still we weren't done. The operation had grown so massive that federal teams across 5 states were now coordinating raids, arrests, and financial seizures. Dorothy had taken her place in front of a Senate subcommittee to deliver preliminary testimony. Marcus was scheduled to testify next month. I was set to appear after. And through it all, the threat remained. Anonymous emails, strange vehicles. Spotted near the safe house, one afternoon, an unmarked drone hovered above the facility for 15 minutes before disappearing over the ridge. This is what power does, Chen said. It doesn't go quietly, it thrashes. But we weren't going quietly either. Not after what they did, not after what we uncovered. The storm wasn't over. We were in the eye now. The safe house air felt heavier by the day, not because of the altitude or the lack of windows, but because the pressure was constant now calls coming in at every hour. Encrypted messages blinking across Marcus's secure terminal, and the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead that never turned off, never flickered. Just glared down at us while we hunted the final pieces of the network behind the HOA scheme that had begun as a petty neighborhood power play and spiraled into a national investigation with tendrils deep into real estate corruption, political donations, and organized intimidation. Dorothy had been pulled back to Washington to prepare for the formal hearings. Her testimony now considered so critical that she was moved into protective custody and scheduled for a closed door. Briefing with the Senate Intelligence Committee? That left Marcus, Agent Chen, and me working from the core, poring over the data wall we'd built in one room of the facility screens lined up edge to edge. Each showing another company name, another transaction, another property deed that had been flipped, squeezed, or stolen at some point in the chaos. Marcus stopped calling it the HOA case and started calling it what it really was. Operation Hollow Crown, named after a line he'd found in one of the intercepted communications that said the community wears the crown, but it's hollow beneath the rules. It was more than poetic. It was their mission statement, their entire justification for exploiting neighborhoods and calling it regulation. We had uncovered 112 properties across 13 states, all acquired under similar patterns: citations, fines, fake police enforcement, then quiet buyouts through Mountain Vista Holdings or one of its subsidiaries. Some families had disappeared without a trace. Others had filed lawsuits that were quietly dismissed or settled with NDA agreements so tight they couldn't speak a word. Chen coordinated with field teams who were now preparing simultaneous warrants to be executed across 5 time zones. A coordinated takedown of over 24 individuals, including lawyers, financial officers, real estate agents, and even one municipal code enforcement director who had been caught on camera accepting a duffel bag from a Mountain Vista handler. Meanwhile, Marcus traced the money. He had become obsessed with it, mapping the way dollars moved like blood through veins, following every transfer, every shell account, until he found what we had all been waiting for, the central account. It was hidden behind 6 layers of proxies, offshore entities, and cryptocurrency shielding. But Marcus cracked through the final wall and stared at the screen, jaw tight as he read the name. "You're not going to believe this," he whispered. And he turned the screen to show me. The account holder was a retired senator, now CEO of a so-called housing redevelopment nonprofit based out of a luxury tower in Manhattan. A man who had served on 3 congressional housing committees and still appeared as a guest expert on Sunday morning political panels. He wasn't just funding the operation, he was its architect. Every dollar Susan Hayes spent, every thug She hired every lawyer who sent a letter to a terrified family had been signed off by this man. And now we had him. Marcus immediately compiled the data chain, documented the transactions, and uploaded it to the FBI's internal database. Within the hour, the Justice Department issued a sealed indictment. Agent Chen looked at us, not smiling. "Just resolve. You just brought down a kingmaker," she said. "Be ready for the fallout." The fallout came. Within 2 days, a flood of media requests poured in. Journalists who had previously ignored the HOA drama, now desperately trying to catch up. To understand how a small cabin raid in Colorado had turned into a headline involving congressional corruption and real estate crime syndicates. Right. The story leaked to the press with surgical precision, just enough to expose the truth, but not so much that it compromised witness protection or evidence. CNN ran with the headline, "From HOA Harassment to Federal Indictment, the story of the Rohr family and the FBI sting that followed." Suddenly, we were public figures, not by choice, not by design, but because there was no hiding anymore. Our faces were on news specials, our story retold by anchors, our names trending online, and with it came both support and threats. Thousands of comments flooded in. Some thanked us for standing up. Others accused us of being part of some deep state land grab. Death threats trickled into the Bureau's social media monitoring systems. One man posted a video claiming he would find our cabin and finish what Susan Hayes started. He was arrested 2 states away with printed maps of Pine Ridge in his car. Still, it shook me. Marcus, ever the soldier, shrugged it off. "We've survived worse," he said, "and we're not done yet." The final piece came unexpectedly. A letter, handwritten, mailed to the Bureau under a fake name but routed directly to us. Inside a single sentence, "You broke the chain, but the crown still lives." There was no signature. Just a photo, grainy, black and white, showing a meeting room filled with men in suits. Their faces partially obscured, seated around a table with a Mountain Vista Holdings banner on the wall. Marcus scanned the image, enhanced the faces, ran them through facial recognition. 7 matches came back, 5 were already under indictment, 2 were missing. "We're not done," he said again, this time not as a warning, but as a promise. The story had gone national, but the cleanup would take years. Families needed restitution. Laws needed rewriting. Protections had to be put in place. Someone had to make sure it didn't happen again. Agent Chen told us we could return to our normal lives after the hearings. She said we'd be relocated, given new identities if we chose, new homes, new starts. But when she asked if we were ready to move on, Marcus looked at me and I knew the answer without speaking. "We don't want new," I said. "We want what was stolen." So we returned to Pine Ridge, not under cover of night, not in secret. We walked into town in daylight, heads high. The cabin was still standing, though the damage from the raid was visible: splintered frame, cracked windows, overturned furniture, but it was ours. We rebuilt. Every nail, every board. Neighbors came to help people who'd stayed quiet before, now emboldened by the truth. One family who'd sold under pressure showed up with boxes of supplies and hugs. Another offered to mow our lawn for a year. Even the sheriff stopped by, shaking his head. "I didn't know," he said. "No one did," I replied. "That's why we need to keep talking." We held a town meeting, not an official HOA event, but a community gathering. No one stood at a podium. No one handed out fines. We just sat in folding chairs and talked about rules, about rights, about watching out for one another. Marcus spoke briefly, not about martial arts or the FBI, but about knowing when something feels wrong and having the courage to stand up anyway. There were no cameras, no reporters, just neighbors listening. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like Pine Ridge could truly be home again. Not perfect, not untouchable, but real, honest. Ours. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees the way it used to, before everything changed, before the cabin raid, before the fake cops. Before Susan Hayes and her lies exploded into something so much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. And as I stood on the newly rebuilt front porch beside Marcus, Coffee in hand, I realized we weren't just returning to normal, we were rewriting it. The cabin, once a place of retreat, had become the origin point of a federal investigation. And now, somehow, it was a symbol of what could happen when ordinary people refused to be bullied into silence. Marcus was already moving again. Of course, his drone systems had been upgraded. The perimeter reinforced, and he had converted one of the storage sheds into a digital security hub, not just for us, but for other homeowners in Pine Ridge who wanted help ensuring their homes weren't being watched, hacked, or targeted by anyone again. Agent Chen checked in weekly, though not always in person. Now that the indictments were public, and Operation Hollow Crown had been made part of an ongoing federal review, she'd been reassigned to a new joint task force aimed at preventing HOA abuse across the country. But she promised us that if any part of the network tried to resurface, we'd be the first to know. Dorothy returned too, though briefly, stopping by with a box of homemade cookies and a note scribbled on the inside of the lid that read, "The watchdogs are always watching." Now, she'd been invited to testify again, this time in front of a national panel for HOA. Regulation reformed while she claimed she was too old for politics. There was a fire in her eyes that said she wasn't going to stop until the last stone was overturned. That week, Marcus and I were invited to Washington, not as witnesses, but as advisors. The Justice Department had created a new advisory unit made up of civilians who had experienced HOA-related corruption firsthand. We weren't government employees, but our data, insight, and firsthand experience had become too valuable to ignore. And when they offered Marcus a chance to officially rejoin the Bureau, not as a field agent, but as a strategic systems advisor, he hesitated for only a moment before saying yes. "I'm not done teaching," he said, "just moving from defense to offense." We spent 2 days in D.C. testifying in private sessions, sitting in on legal drafting meetings, reviewing proposed reforms to HOA authority limits and transparency mandates. And it was surreal to sit across from senators and hear them ask, what should we have done differently? But the moment that stuck with me most wasn't in a chamber or behind closed doors, it was in a hallway. A janitor passed us, nodded, and then quietly said to me, "Thank you for fighting back. My sister lost her house to people like that." I wanted to respond, but he was gone, just like that. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just our story, it was happening everywhere. 2 people with no FBI connections, no drones, no Agent Chen, just families trying to live in peace. Blindsided by systems designed to strip them of their homes, their rights, and their voices. And the more we uncovered, the more we realized Pine Ridge wasn't unique. It was just the one that fought back. When we returned to the cabin, something was waiting for us, an envelope tucked behind the screen door. Inside was a photo. A threat this time, but a memory. Snapshot of Marcus and me on the deck before the chaos, before the attack, before any of it. No note, no signature, just the image. I don't know who sent it. Maybe someone trying to remind us why we started, or maybe just someone saying you made it. In the months that followed, we rebuilt more than just walls. We rebuilt trust. The new HOA formed from scratch by actual residents held open elections. Every meeting was public, recorded, and archived online. Rules had to be voted on by majority and approved by third-party legal counsel. No more fines without due process. No more secret violations. No more hidden cameras. And Pine Ridge, once the battleground, became the model for a new kind of neighborhood. One where people didn't fear their own community. One where power was earned, not seized. One where stories like ours wouldn't happen again. Marcus opened a small training center nearby, offering self-defense and digital security workshops. He called it Resilience. Simple name, big meaning, damn. And every week people came. Families, elderly residents, teenagers, they listened. Learned. They prepared. Not for war, but for peace. Peace earned through knowledge, through strength, through unity. As for me, I kept the cabin. I still wake up early. I still make coffee. I still listen to the wind in the trees. But now, when I hear footsteps or a car engine in the distance, I don't flinch. I check the cameras. I call my son. I know we're not alone, because this isn't just a cabin anymore. It's where the fight started, where the truth won. We proved that even against fake cops, corrupt HOAs, and the darkest corners of organized real estate crime. A father and son could stand their ground and send the whole machine crashing down. And if you're reading this, watching this, listening to this, know this, you don't need to be part of the system to beat it. You just need to be brave enough to push back. Subscribe to Sham Stories right now for more unbelievable true stories, where justice fights back and wins. You won't believe what happens next.